Guys, welcome back. We're going to sew today, or we were going to, but my machine has decided that it has to be cleaned before I can do anything else. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to clean my machine. And while I do that, we're going to do some more memory lane traveling. Today we're going to talk about food. What else is my favorite subject, right? I have, well, as you know, I grew up in Appalachia. Looking for my screwdriver here and my little brush. Take my plate off and clean this all out because it's been a minute. I grew up in Appalachia, and in Appalachia there is one kind of food, and it's either your mommy cooked it, your granny cooked it, or you cooked it. There's not many restaurants up there. Most of the places are really small towns. Like I said, the only time I can remember going out to eat ever was I remember going to a McDonald's on a school field trip. That was a long time ago. I think it cost me $1.25 for my entire meal, including a drink, a hamburger, and some French fries. So it wasn't a gourmet meal by any chance, and it wasn't anything I'd never had before. Hamburgers and French fries, everybody's had those, whether at home or at some little hole in the wall somewhere. I think there might have been a Dairy Queen somewhere around where I grew up, but that's the only places I remember restaurant-wise. I'm going to need my big brush today. Well, let's get down in here and get this cleaned out. Now, I'm cleaning a Baby Lock Jazz 2, and as you can tell, I do a lot of sewing. This is maybe a week's worth of lint down in here, so it's not a big deal, or it's not a long term that I've had this in here. Anyway, so when we moved from West Virginia down to Florida, I was getting ready to start my freshman year of high school, finishing up 8th grade. I think there was a week, maybe 2 of school left when we got here. So it was definitely culture shock. And just for reference, if anyone else is in Gen X like me, when we moved to Florida, it was during the Cuban boat lifts, and when all the riots were going on because of the immigrants being brought in. Sounds familiar, right? Anyway, we moved to Florida, and all this new stuff opened up to me. My family, my aunts and uncles and stuff down here introduced me to all kinds of new food. I mean, I'd never had Mexican food, and I'd never had Italian food, and oh, they were thrilled to take the new little girl out on the town and show her all the different food types I've been missing. I loved it all. I mean, tacos and nachos and enchiladas. I'd never had tortillas before. And I'd never had spaghetti, or it was, well, you know, the Chef Boyardee stuff out of a box, but never had real Italian spaghetti with basil and oregano. I mean, salt and pepper are the major spices in Appalachia, and butter and sausage. But you don't get, you know, Mexican food up there. You didn't back then. I guess it's more common now than it was back then. But so here I was, this brand new kid in Florida, learning about all this new stuff. And so when summer was over and I started 9th grade, I met people from all kinds of cultures that I'd never heard of before. Really, Mexican food and people from Mexico and Haiti and Cuba and And, black people, I never had much experience with them. I didn't know much about anything. Little girl from the backwoods. So here I'd learned about uh, Mexican food and Italian food and all this stuff that just was so yummy. And one of the girls at school started talking about soul food. And I was like, "Oh, soul food, what's that?" She's like, "Oh, that's the stuff my people cook." And I was like, "Oh, well, I got to try this." Well, there weren't soul food restaurants, so to speak, of back then. There were places you could go where you could get like Jamaican food and stuff. But remember, little Havana riots were still going on. It wasn't common to go into certain parts of town, and that's where those restaurants were. So this little girl was like, I'll take you home for dinner. And I was like, yeah, I'll go for that. So I finally, we work out me going over there for dinner one night. We get over there, and I think her name was Tanya, Latanya, something like that. She was the sweetest girl. And her family was so sweet and so kind. And her mama is like, "Oh, yeah, girl, we're going to introduce you to soul food." And I was like, "All right." So dinner time comes around, and she's like, "You girls come help set the table." And we did, of course. That's what you do. And we helped set the table and get all the food in there. And I'm carrying dishes from the kitchen, like her mama's telling me to do. And I'm carrying in cornbread and beans and collard greens and fried chicken, all that good stuff. And her mama comes in and sits down, and she's like, "All right, girls, well, help yourselves." And I'm sitting there looking at the table, and I'm just looking at it. And she looks over at me, Latanya does, and she says, "What's the matter?" I said, "I'm waiting on the soul food." She said, "It's on the table." I said, "This is the same stuff I ate at home. How can this be soul food?" Turns out hillbilly cooking and soul food aren't that different. So I learned a lot that day, and that's when I realized that most cultures cook similar food. It just depends on the spices they put in it and what kind of bread they serve with it. And Appalachian cooking and soul food are very similar. I have a piece of thread caught in my machine I'm trying to get out here. It has decided that it's going to be an issue today. So let's move this aside. But the food was good. There was absolutely nothing wrong with it. And her mama actually used spices in her food, unlike what I was used to in Appalachia. She used other things besides just salt and pepper. But it was basically the same food I was used to, which, like I said, was a little disappointing, but kind of tells you that people aren't all that different no matter where they're from. All right, so that's clean, but I got to take off the back of my machine in order to get to where that thread is caught inside of it. So let's turn this little baby. Ooh, and you can see how dirty it is up underneath my sewing machine, so I'll have to clean that up before we're all done. I'm not doing anything crazy by taking this piece off my machine. This is actually why this is here, is so that you can get in there and clean it up. I just need to be able to see it. So let's turn this all around. Get all the stuff out of our way. Get all the garbage off of here. There we go. I can see the screw now to take it out. But that was a big shock for me whenever I realized that soul food and hillbilly food, what I grew up on, were the same thing. It's all done. If you're like me, you want to see if all this comes off and if it gets clean. So I will fast forward through all of this for you, maybe. Nice long screw. Let's put it right here where I won't lose it. That's why you want to move your sewing machine and clean it regularly. Up close view for this. I don't know if you can see that, but there is, see the thread right there? There's thread cut in here and it needs to be cleaned out. So let's do this part. And it looks like I've got thread wrapped around that shaft, which is not a good thing. So I'm just snipping the threads loose because I can't get up in there real close and see. I truly think there's another thread there. But if there is, I'm not getting it. So I'm going to rethread my machine and then I'll put the back on here. And I will bring you guys back once I get that done. Okay, so I got the piece put back on my machine. And I wanted to show you guys all the thread that I pulled out of there. That was all wrapped around that shaft. So you want to be really careful when you thread the baby lock. that you get the thread where you want it to go, because it looks like the error was in my threading. All right, and so I've cleaned everything out here. Sure, yep. And that is a quick way to check to make sure that you have your bobbin back in where it's supposed to go, is just turn your little handle. Don't press your foot pedal, just turn the handle. See, and it's still not right. There is a little arrow on here that tells you where it's supposed to sit. And line up that. And I'm obviously not putting the arrow where it's supposed to be. That's what it's supposed to do. Just like that. Okay. So now let's put the plate back on here. I never remove my screws from there unless I have to. I can feel that the screws are down in where they're supposed to be. Find my little screwdriver because I set it down. And I have problems with my hands. I have arthritis. So it may sound like it would be a good idea to get some kind of an electric screwdriver, battery operated. No, not for a sewing machine. Unless you have mad skills at not over tightening things, you want to do it by hand as much as possible, because it's easy to strip these screws out and you don't want to over tighten it to the point that something gets messed up, or that the next person, especially if that's going to be you, can't take it off by hand. And then I start my screws, and I don't know if you can tell, I'm using my thumb. You could use a nickel or a dime as your screwdriver here. Usually they work pretty well. I have this little screwdriver that came with the machine, and I'm not overly fond of it. And I am torquing these down as tight as my hands can do it. But if you're really strong, which I'm not, you may not want to torque it down quite so tight. I don't know if torque is the technical term. But I keep tightening it as long as I can gently tighten it. And I'm not left-handed, so when I do it with my left hand, I know that it's not going to be overly tight. Okay. So now I don't need the screwdriver, the tweezers, the little brush. I'm going to put my bobbin back in. There are no parts on this machine that you're supposed to oil. I do sometimes put oil in my domestic machines, but only in areas where I know it's supposed to be oiled. I'm going to put my little foot back on. Make sure my pressure foot is up. And thread my machine. Put my presser foot down. It's supposed to be an automatic threader, but it doesn't always work that way. Press your foot back up. What I'm doing is putting a little tiny drop of spit, saliva, for those who want to be fancy, on the back of my needle. And then this is the hard part for me. do all that other stuff. But be generous with the drop of saliva that you put on there. Pull your bobbin thread up. And then something I always like to do for me is I like to take a little piece of test fabric. I'm looking for something over here in my scraps that isn't. And I'm going to use my hand to turn the bobbin a few times to make sure that nothing sounds wonky. Then we're going to check. Make sure that everything's stitching properly. It's a good time to adjust your tension if you need to do so. Do any of that stuff. All right. Now that we've done that and cleaned our machine, we are ready for the rest of the week. You all have a great day. Thank you for watching.